my wife said. I didn't mean to sleep with him. I was just lonely and depressed. But when the truth came out, she claimed to be the victim, saying he took advantage of her weakness. I'll say it straight. I won the lottery, but not with money. I won the most unhinged wife I have ever known. And I don't say it with pride. For me, it is the worst shame. I don't understand how I lost so many years of my life with her. I'm 45 years old. My wife Rocio is too, and we have a 20-year-old daughter who studies and lives in a student residence. Rocio had been having lower back pain for a while. We thought it was nothing new, until one day she couldn't get out of bed. We went to the hospital, they did MRIs, tests, and the diagnosis was clear: severe spinal compression. She needed surgery and a long rehabilitation process. We're not talking about weeks, but months. The news hit us like a bucket of cold water, but you don't complain when it comes to health. If I've learned anything in life, it's that the body doesn't wait. I had to keep working because someone had to pay the bills, but I arranged to visit her every day after work. My daughter also visited her at first, but since her university life is out of town, she couldn't always be there. My biggest fear was that Rocio would feel lonely. It was already hard enough not being able to walk, let alone spending the whole day staring at the ceiling. I suggested bringing her best friend to keep her company or paying someone trustworthy, even bringing her sister from the countryside for a few months. But she didn't want to. She told me she didn't want to bother anyone, that she preferred to handle it alone. It seemed strange to me, but I attributed it to pride. It was almost 3 months of hospitalization. At first she was depressed. She cried. She said she didn't feel useful. I did my best to lift her spirits, but as the weeks went by I started to notice something. Her mood changed. She no longer sounded so dejected. When I visited her, I found her with her hair done, wearing perfume, and with a spirit I hadn't seen in weeks. She even started joking with the nurses. I didn't think badly of it at first. Maybe she was getting better, I thought. But there are gestures one knows all too well after being married for 2 decades. One afternoon, while I was talking to her, I saw a young male nurse approach with her medication tray. He smiled at her, and she returned the smile with a touch on his arm. One would think she was thanking him because it was all very subtle. I'm not paranoid, but I'm observant. After 20 years, you learn to read your partner without words. That gesture set off all my alarms. I asked her who he was, and she told me he was her new nurse, that the previous nurse had been transferred. She said it naturally, almost with annoyance, as if I were exaggerating. But there was something in her tone that I didn't like. That guy's name was Alexander. I wouldn't forget it. I decided not to make a scene. I thought, if I'm right, it will show sooner or later. And if not, at least I can be at ease. So for the next few visits, I did more observing than talking. I sat in silence and watched how the staff moved. Soon I noticed something else. There was a nurse who couldn't stand Alexander. The way she looked at him, the tone she used when responding to him, it all smelled of rivalry. One afternoon, when Rocio was asleep from the medication, I approached that nurse. Her name was Martina. I spoke to her calmly, and after a few minutes of conversation, I told her what I thought, that my wife was getting too familiar with Alexander. When I said his name, Martina looked at me intently and let out a sigh as if she had been waiting for someone to ask. That guy is an opportunist, she told me bluntly. It wouldn't be the first time he's gotten involved with a married woman. He has a reputation for trying his luck wherever he sees an opportunity or just for the fun of it. She told me that Alexander had started by cleaning urine in geriatrics, but had risen quickly because, as they said, he slept with the head of nurses. Martina detested him. She said he used his good boy face to get what he wanted and that several women had fallen for his game. That's when I understood I was facing an ally. I confessed that I needed proof, because if my suspicions were true, I wasn't planning on making a scene or fighting in public, but I did plan to protect what was mine. I offered her money for information. Call it bribery if you want, but I call it defense. I was not going to get a divorce without securing my interests after 20 years of marriage with shared accounts, a house, and savings. All our finances were intertwined. I had to think with a cool head. Martina accepted immediately. She gave me her number, and we agreed that she would let me know if she saw anything out of place. Not even 30 minutes had passed since I left the hospital when she wrote to me. I already have something, the message said. My heart raced. I opened the photo. It was Rocio, my wife, sitting on the hospital bed with Alexander beside her. She was holding his hand. Not a medical handhold, not a casual squeeze. It was an affectionate grip with the smile of someone who feels understood. 20 years of marriage reduced to an image. I stared at that photo for a long time. I didn't get angry immediately. What I felt was a mix of shame and disappointment. Shame for having trusted so much. Disappointment because I never imagined that a person who had promised love in sickness and in health would understand that phrase backwards. I replied to Martina to keep watching, that I needed more proof. If there was one thing I was sure of, it was that I was not going to act without being certain, not for her, but for me. In a divorce, mistakes are expensive. If the infidelity was proven, I would have the upper hand. And believe me, I planned to do it without a single argument. Over the next 2 days, Martina kept me informed of everything. She sent me photos, messages, even videos that I won't go into detail about. There was an audio where she told him, "You can't imagine how much you helped me get through this." And he replied, "I will always be here." I didn't need more. I already knew. With that information, I had more than enough material for a divorce with no concessions. I saved every file, printed copies, and uploaded it to the cloud. When you discover a betrayal, you must think with a cool head, not with your heart. 3 days later, I went to the hospital. I didn't tell her I was coming. I went straight to the rehabilitation area where she was. When she saw me, she was surprised. She asked me why I had that look on my face. I didn't answer. I just said, calmly but firmly, "We are getting a divorce." She looked at me as if she didn't understand. Then she sounded nervous and said, "What are you saying? Is it because of the hospital expenses? Don't worry, I'll sign the voluntary discharge. I don't want you to feel pressured. Then, if I get sick again, that will be another matter." I rolled my eyes. I already knew that manipulation attempt. I didn't fall for it. I replied, "No, Rocio, it's not about the money. It's because I already know you're cheating on me with the nurse." She froze. Then she let out a forced laugh. "I don't know what nonsense you're talking about. That nurse has become a good friend. Can't you see how young he is? He could be my son." That's when I laughed. "Yeah, right. But you wouldn't want me to show you photos and videos of how you help your friend in ways you yourself will understand, would you?" And then her smile vanished. I didn't know if she was going to cry or scream. What she did was the worst thing she could have done. She started begging me to forgive her. She said she never meant for it to go that far, that she felt lonely, depressed, that the nurse was just trying to help her, and that things got confused. According to her, it wasn't love, it was confusion. Listening to her talk like that, justifying a betrayal with depression, turned my stomach. And then she came out with the classic textbook phrase, "We can forget about this, please. I'll be discharged soon. Everything will get better. Let's not throw 20 years of marriage down the drain." She talked about when we would be old, about our agreements, about the daughter we have. She said those things shouldn't matter, that we could overcome it together. I told her that I had already started the divorce proceedings, that a few days ago I had signed the petition, and that my lawyer was preparing everything. Her face changed. It went from crying to surprise, and then to a kind of hope. "You did it out of anger?" she asked me. "No, I did it because you were unfaithful to me," I told her. "The only thing I'm going to make sure of is that you get nothing. That will be my way of forgiving you." When she heard that, her eyes lit up. For a second, she thought there was room to manipulate the situation, so I clarified. "Yes, I will forgive you, but listen, only if I get to keep everything. But that doesn't mean we will stay together, just that I won't carry the hate anymore." And I left. Rocio was left speechless, looking at me with the expression of someone who has just realized they have lost. That night I sat in the kitchen and called my daughter. She was always my pride, intelligent, responsible, strong. She won a scholarship and lives away from home. I told her what had happened. I didn't want to worry her, but it seemed like the right thing to do. My daughter got very angry. She told me not to worry, that she had exams, but as soon as she finished them she would come back to be with me. I thanked her, but I asked her to focus on her studies. I didn't want her to lose anything because of her mother. The following days I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't answer Rocio's calls. I spoke with my employer. I work for a company that provides family health insurance, and I asked them to remove Rocio as a beneficiary of my policy. The procedure was simple. I submitted my request to Human Resources indicating the start of the divorce process. They sent the request to the insurance company, which notified the hospital that she was no longer covered. I didn't care if that made her uncomfortable. I was not going to continue financing her recovery while she was lying. Rocio called me several times after that, but I didn't answer. I had nothing more to say to her. My daughter arrived on the weekend. As soon as she walked in, I knew she had seen her mother. Her gaze was hard, her lips tense. I went to see her, my daughter told me when she returned from the hospital. She tried to tell me that you were exaggerating, that the nurse just helped her. But, Dad, I saw how she talked about him, the way she defended him. I don't recognize my mother. I didn't respond. There was no need. We both knew what it meant. A few days passed and Rocio was finally discharged. I had already removed her from the health insurance, so as soon as she got home she was furious. She brought an envelope full of papers from the hospital and threw them on the table. Look what you've accomplished, she told me. Now I have debts that we will have to assume between the two of us. I'm still your wife. You can't leave me like this. I looked at her without moving. No, Rocio, you created those debts. I already informed them that we are in the process of divorce. The insurance stopped covering you last week. She raised her voice, saying that it was illegal, that the hospital couldn't charge her if the treatment had started when she was still covered. I didn't care. I wasn't going to argue laws with someone who confused morality with convenience. If you have problems with the hospital, talk to them, I said. But don't expect me to rescue you from something you brought on yourself. She kept talking, saying there were expensive medicines that would be better to pay for before they generated interest. I just replied, you pay? I've already paid enough for you. Honestly, I didn't want her in the house, but I couldn't stop her from coming in. As long as the divorce wasn't finalized, the law still recognized her as a co-owner of the home, so she had a legal right to stay. The next day she sat on the sofa, sighed, and said, I've been thinking about all this. And I replied without looking up. I realized that, well, that I'm a victim. I rolled my eyes, assuming we were back to the same thing. Again she told me that the nurse had taken advantage of her, that she was vulnerable, that the medication made her feel confused, that he knew what he was doing and pressured her, that it was all unintentional. I listened to her calmly, because she no longer provoked anger in me, but pity. She said he was a potential abuser, that she had to do something so he wouldn't hurt another patient again. She said it with such conviction that for a moment, it almost seemed like she believed it herself. I understand you want a divorce, that's fine, she added. But now I have to seek justice. That guy took advantage of my condition. It's his fault I lost you. She said it as if it were a moral crusade. Then she looked at me with an almost triumphant tone. When all this is over, when he pays for what he did, we can talk again. That's when I laughed. It was absurd. She had gone from traitor to victim in less than a week. She was no longer seeking forgiveness. She was seeking redemption, and not with me, but with herself. My lawyer confirmed that the divorce process was underway, but there was a delay in the judicial system due to a backlog of cases, so the process would still take a few more weeks. That meant Rocio would continue to live under the same roof temporarily. I slept in the guest room. I didn't want to see her or hear her. It was during that time that her campaign began. First, she spoke with the hospital administration. She filed a formal complaint against the nurse Alexander, accusing him of inappropriate conduct with a patient undergoing postoperative treatment. She attached a written account of her experience and requested an investigation. According to her, he touched her without medical necessity and manipulated her emotionally during her rehabilitation. I know the kind of language those complaints use, ambiguous, emotional, designed to generate suspicion without directly stating anything. I don't know how it happened, but the other nurse, Martina, joined the complaint against her colleague as a witness. How did Rocio manage that? I have no idea. When the hospital stopped responding to her, Rocio decided she couldn't stay still. It wasn't enough for her to have filed her internal complaint. She started to move everything externally through social media. She opened a new account where she uploaded videos telling her story. In them, she said she had been a vulnerable patient, that her nurse crossed professional boundaries, and that the health system had abandoned her. She used big words, the kind people repeat without fully understanding: abused, silenced, re-victimized. The detail is that her campaign was no longer about Alexander. Over time, the focus shifted to herself. She posted pictures of herself in a hospital gown, self-help quotes, and messages like, "I'm not the only one. It happens to many women when we are at our weakest." And of course, on the internet, there's never a shortage of people who will buy any story with the right packaging. Unknown women began to comment things like, "We believe you. You are brave. Thank you for speaking up." Her ego inflated. She no longer talked about pain or regret, but about inspiring others not to be silent. It didn't take long for some local media to pick up the story. It wasn't big news, but it was enough to put pressure on the hospital. The story said something like, "Patient alleges abuse during her rehabilitation, seeks justice for other invisible victims." At that point, the hospital gave in. Without further process or real investigation, they fired Alexander for loss of confidence. They couldn't afford to be seen as the clinic that ignored a public complaint. In their world, reputation is worth more than truth. Rocio found out before anyone else. She came home with a wide, almost childish smile and her phone in her hand. She showed me a message confirming the nurse's permanent suspension. "See," she told me excitedly. "The hospital fired him. That means I was right, that I was always the victim." She spoke with a mix of relief and triumph, like someone who wins a moral competition. "You believe me now, right?" she asked, lowering her voice. "I've already served justice. Cancel that divorce petition, please." My daughter was in the living room listening to everything from the dining room. She stood up and entered the conversation without hesitation. "My dad would never give you a chance," she said. "Not after how you disrespected him. Not just him, but me too, this family." I nodded. "Exactly. She's right." Rocio looked at us in disbelief, as if we were speaking another language. "But I did all this with the possibility of us getting back together," she shouted. "Don't you see I'm a victim?" Her tone was rising. She started to speak louder, almost screaming. I no longer had the energy to argue. I just looked at her for a few seconds and then looked away. At that moment, I only heard a slap. I turned and saw my daughter standing with her hand raised and a cold stare. Rocio was frozen, touching her cheek. "Mom," my daughter told her, "stop being a child, stop playing the victim, and take your responsibilities." Rocio didn't say a word. My daughter turned around and went to her room without looking back. I did not intervene. There was nothing to add. Silently, I thought that I had raised the only sensible person in this story. During the following days, Rocio became a shadow. She no longer spoke. She spent hours looking at her phone, checking her networks, reading the messages of support that still came to her. But the euphoria began to disappear when she realized that her fame did not pay the hospital debts, nor did it stop the divorce process. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called me. "We have everything ready," he said. "The resolution is already signed." That afternoon, I came home with the papers in my hand. Rocio was in the kitchen. I left the envelope on the table. "What is this?" she asked. "Your freedom," I replied. She didn't open it. She read the pages one by one. Her expression changed. First confusion, then rage. "This can't be. You're leaving me with all the hospital debts," she said. "And besides, it says here that I renounce any claim on the assets." "I warned you," I replied calmly. "I told you I would take everything from you. But don't worry, with that you will have my forgiveness." She looked at me without understanding, as if she expected me to regret it. She tried to appeal. She looked for a lawyer. She wanted to challenge it, to allege manipulation, but she had nothing. The evidence of her infidelity was too clear. The photos, the messages, the hospital records. My lawyer only had to present them for any attempt at a claim to die before it began. The divorce was clean. She was left with her debts and without her version of a moral victory. And to top it all off, weeks later, the networks began to turn their backs on her. Some followers realized that there was no real evidence of what she was saying. Others accused her of lying, of ruining an innocent man's life. Her account ended up closing on its own amidst insults and oblivion. I sold the house. I wanted to start from scratch. With the money, I bought a small cabin on the outskirts of the city. Rocio, for her part, disappeared from my life. I learned from an acquaintance that she tried to go back to work, but was fired after a few weeks for attitude problems.